And wherever you're watching from around the world, we are live from our studios here in Lagos, Nigeria. I am Kelly Egiga. We begin with the war in Gaza, with Israeli authorities denying allegations its troops opened fire at a crowd of Palestinians rushing to a convoy delivering humanitarian aid into Gaza. The health ministry in Gaza says Israeli troops in the northern Gaza Strip opened fire on at least 112 Palestinians scrambling for food on Thursday. At least 760 people were injured in that attack. Israeli defense spokesperson Daniel Hagari says Israel's war is against Hamas and not against the people of Gaza. He says, quote, "The Israel Defense Forces operate according to the rules of engagement and international law. No IDF strike was conducted towards the aid convoy. On the contrary, the IDF was there conducting a humanitarian operation," end quote. Mr. Hagari claims soldiers monitoring the aid delivery fired warning shots into the sky to disperse a crowd that gathered around the convoy before it arrived at the designated distribution spot. And reactions are pouring in from world leaders over the killing of more than 100 Palestinians during the aid delivery in the northern Gaza Strip. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ying says Beijing is shocked by the incident and strongly condemns it. Authorities in Yemen has also condemned Israel's actions, saying the ongoing massacres include the bombing of shelters and of places where aid is distributed, amounts to war crimes and the collective punishment of innocent people. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the incident an ugly massacre conducted by the Israeli occupation army. Hamas described the attack as an unprecedented war crime, while EU Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell denounced the deaths as totally unacceptable. In France, President Emmanuel Macron expressed deep indignation at the attack, and Spain, Turkey, Colombia, Australia, Portugal, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Egypt also joined the rising international condemnation of Israel for the attacks. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says Washington is seeking additional information on the tragedy in the Gaza Strip. The U.S. is reiterating its stance on the significance of providing more humanitarian aid to Gaza through multiple access points.
Let me start by addressing the tragic incident in northern Gaza today, where more than 100 Palestinians are reported to have been killed and many more injured. I first of all want to express the United States' deepest condolences to the families of those who died. We are urgently seeking additional information on exactly what took place. We have been in touch with the Israeli government since early this morning and understand that an investigation is underway. We will be monitoring that investigation closely and pressing for answers. This tragic event also underscores the importance of expanding and sustaining the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza in response to the dire humanitarian situation, including through a potential temporary ceasefire as part of a hostage deal. We continue to make clear in all of our discussions with the government of Israel that all possible measures must be taken to allow the entry of more assistance into Gaza through as many points of access as possible and to enable safe and secure distribution of that aid throughout Gaza. We also continue to explore other measures. I'm not going to get into what those are from this podium, but we continue to consider a number of other possible measures to get assistance in, as well as working with other countries to get assistance in. You saw the government of Jordan facilitate an airdrop earlier this week, something that we very much support.
And let's bring in more reactions now. The latest is from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is calling for an independent investigation into the massacre of civilians in the northern Gaza Strip. This was relayed by spokesperson Stefan Dujarric, commenting on the general death toll since October 7th, released by Hamas-run health ministry. The UN chief says he's appalled by the tragic casualties.
The Secretary General is appalled by the tragic human toll of the conflict in Gaza, in which more than 30,000 people have now reportedly been killed and over 70,000 injured. Tragically, an unknown number of people lie under the rubble. The Secretary General condemns the incident today in northern Gaza, in which more than 100 people were reportedly killed or injured while seeking life-saving aid. The desperate civilians in Gaza need urgent help, including those in the besieged northern part of Gaza, where the United Nations has not been able to deliver aid for more than a week. The Secretary General reiterates his call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the unconditional release of all the hostages held in Gaza. He once again calls for urgent steps so that critical humanitarian aid can get into and across Gaza for all those who so desperately need it. Yesterday, UNRWA reported that displaced people, including some UNRWA staff, were forced to evacuate from 2 schools where they were sheltering earlier this week. Some were arrested by Israeli forces and 1 woman was reportedly killed. Our colleagues in the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs say there's an urgent need for unimpeded access to northern Gaza to deliver food and establish stabilization centers for severe acute malnutrition, as well as outpatient treatments. As we have warned repeatedly, and as you heard from our humanitarian colleagues in the Security Council earlier this week, the risk of death by starvation in Gaza is growing, with children and pregnant women being severely impacted. The continued hostilities and other challenges continue to impede our efforts to reach civilians in Gaza with life-saving health and nutrition care.
And let's stay with the United Nations for a moment, as officials are expressing deep concerns about the restrictions imposed by the Israeli military on desperately needed aid operations. The World Health Organization, WHO, notes that no humanitarian aid has reached the north since January 23rd, an area where urgent humanitarian assistance is needed.
Out of ambulance. The Israeli forces blocked the WHO-led convoy for many hours the moment it left the hospital. The Israeli military forced patients and staff out of ambulances and stripped all paramedics of their clothes. 3 Palestinian Red Crescent Society paramedics were subsequently detained, although their personal details had been shared with the Israeli forces in advance, while the rest of the convoy stayed in place for over 7 hours. We have not had any information or any communication from the Israeli authorities why this clearly notified movement, which they, by the way, acknowledged that we had sent them the notification, was still detained, as I said, for at least 7 hours.
You can imagine being already transferred under life-threatening circumstances, not being able to move, or being able to move and then being made to stand outside and having to wait for 7 hours. No humanitarian aid has reached the north since 23 January. That's over a month now, 5 weeks. Then WHO last reached Al-Shifa Hospital, for example, on 22 January. And the urgent access, just over and over again now, of humanitarian aid is needed to avoid further preventable deaths from malnutrition and diseases.
We acknowledge that we have tremendous difficulties distributing the aid that does get in across Gaza. That is certainly not a situation of our making. It is the war itself that creates it. On the top of our list of things that needs to happen, and there's no way around it, is a humanitarian ceasefire.
And let's bring you more updates now from the war, as Israeli military has killed 4 people after bombing a house in the Buresh refugee camp in central Gaza. Authorities say many more were injured in the strike on a residential apartment in the area. In a separate attack, at least 3 people were killed and 10 wounded after Israeli forces bombed a school housing displaced people in Hamad town, a residential complex in Khan Yunis. The victims were taken to Al-Aqsa Maters Hospital in the central Gaza Strip. Now, fierce clashes are also reported to be taking place between Palestinian groups and the Israeli army around the town of Al-Qarara, north of Khan Yunis. In the meantime, dozens of protesters are staging a sit-in protest at Amsterdam's central station, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and denouncing genocide in the enclave. Now, protesters can be seen waving Palestinian flags and banners reading, "Stop Genocide Gaza" and "Ceasefire Now." Some of them were chanting, "The occupation has to go."
In the middle of Amsterdam, in Dam Square, we are here to support our brothers in Palestine, and especially in Gaza and the West Bank. We are independent here, totally. We are just a normal group, just standing with our brothers in Palestine, and we are always here. We have been protesting for the 130 days, always here, and free Palestine.
I'm here because the death toll surpassed already 30,000 and more than 70,000 injuries. And the next that I want to share with the world is a report from the 19th of February that the UN experts upheld by reported human rights violations against Palestinian women and girls. It is saying, "We remind the government of Israel of its obligation to uphold the rights to life, safety, health and dignity of Palestinian women and girls, and to ensure that no one is subjected to violence, torture, ill treatment or degrading treatment, including sexual violence," to the experts say.